How do you become the most powerful person in finance? The man who controls more money than any government on earth?
You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. What we are doing internally is if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted.
To truly be global, you have to be local in every country.
Everyone knows Larry Fink as the kingmaker of Wall Street, the guy who can make or break entire industries with a single letter. But did you know that before BlackRock, he lost 100 million in just 90 days and was thrown out of the most prestigious firm on Wall Street?
Obviously, in 1986, the second quarter, after a record first quarter, we lost $100 million, and then the firm woke up to the amount of risk we were taking.
I was fired. Let's not sugarcoat it. I lost a lot of money and I was done. This is the untold story of Larry Fink's career. Larry Fink was born in 1952 in Van Nuys, California, a middle-class suburb of Los Angeles. His father owned a shoe store, and his mother was a college professor. They weren't wealthy, but they valued education above everything else. Growing up, Larry wasn't the typical Wall Street kid. He wasn't obsessed with money or stocks. In fact, he wanted to be a doctor. But there was one problem. Larry couldn't stand the sight of blood. So instead of medicine, he went to UCLA where he studied political science. After graduating in 1974, he went straight back to UCLA for his MBA, specializing in real estate and finance. And that's where everything changed. In business school, Larry discovered something that would define his entire career: mortgage-backed securities. These were financial products that turned home loans into tradable assets. Most people thought they were boring, but Larry saw opportunity. In 1976, at age 24, Larry graduated with his MBA and got his first job on Wall Street at First Boston, one of the most prestigious investment banks in America. He joined their fixed income department, which basically means bonds, the least sexy part of Wall Street. While everyone else wanted to be in mergers and acquisitions or equity trading, Larry chose bonds. And more specifically, he chose mortgage-backed securities, something most people didn't even understand yet. I fell in love with the bond market. It was like a puzzle. Every mortgage, every cash flow, every interest rate movement, it all fit together in this beautiful mathematical model. And Larry was a natural. He understood the numbers. He understood risk. He understood how to build financial models that could predict cash flows with incredible precision. Within a few years, Larry Fink became the youngest managing director in First Boston's history at age 31. By his early 30s, he was running the entire bond trading department and making the firm millions of dollars. Everything was perfect. Larry was a rising star. He was making more money than he ever dreamed of. He had the respect of everyone on Wall Street. But beneath the surface, something dangerous was building. Here's the thing about mortgage-backed securities in the 1980s. They were incredibly complex. These weren't just simple bonds. They were bundles of thousands of home loans, sliced up into different risk tranches, with cash flows that depended on interest rates, prepayment speeds, and a dozen other variables. Larry thought he understood all of it. He built sophisticated computer models to manage risk. He thought he had everything figured out. And then, in 1986, disaster struck. Interest rates suddenly shifted in a way that Larry's models didn't predict. The mortgage-backed securities that First Boston was holding started hemorrhaging value. And because Larry's department had taken on massive positions, the losses started piling up fast. $10 million, then $30 million, then $50 million. In just 90 days, Larry Fink's bond trading desk lost over $100 million. In today's money, that's nearly $300 million. The entire firm was in shock. How could their golden boy, the youngest managing director in history, lose this much money? Larry later described that moment in an interview. "I thought I understood risk. I thought my models were perfect. And I was wrong. Completely wrong. That mistake cost the firm a fortune, and it cost me everything I had built." Within weeks, Larry was removed from his role. And shortly after that, he was asked to resign. "I was fired. Let's not sugarcoat it. I lost a lot of money and I was done." At 34 years old, Larry Fink's career was over. He had gone from being the youngest managing director at one of Wall Street's top firms to being unemployed and humiliated. Everyone on Wall Street knew about the loss. His name became synonymous with failure. But here's what most people don't know about that moment. Larry didn't spend his time feeling sorry for himself. Instead, he spent months analyzing exactly what went wrong. I couldn't sleep. I kept running the numbers over and over. What did I miss? Where did my models fail? And he came to a brutal realization. The problem wasn't just his models. The problem was that nobody on Wall Street actually understood risk. Everyone was flying blind, making massive bets without really knowing what could go wrong. Larry decided that if he ever got another chance, he would build something completely different. A firm that put risk management at the center of everything. A firm that never made the same mistakes he did. But first, he needed someone to give him that chance. In 1987, Larry got a phone call from Steve Schwarzman and Pete Peterson, the founders of a small private equity firm called Blackstone. They had heard about Larry's expertise in bonds despite his spectacular failure, and they wanted to start a bond trading division. Most people thought they were crazy. Why would you hire the guy who just lost $100 million? But Schwartzman and Peterson saw something different. They saw someone who had learned the most expensive lesson on Wall Street and lived to tell about it. They offered me a partnership, not a job, a partnership. They believed in me when nobody else did. Larry joined Blackstone in 1988 with one condition. He wanted to build something new, not just a bond trading desk, but an entirely new kind of investment firm focused on risk management. Schwartzman agreed, and they started a new division called Blackstone Financial Management. Larry brought in 7 people from First Boston who he trusted, including his old colleagues Ralph Schlosstein and Robert Capito. Together, this small team of 8 people started managing money for institutional clients. But they did it differently than everyone else on Wall Street. First, Larry built the most sophisticated risk management system anyone had ever seen. He called it Aladdin: Asset, Liability, Debt, and Derivative Investment Network. This computer system could analyze thousands of securities in real time and predict how they would behave under different market conditions. In other words, Larry built the exact system that would have prevented his $100 million loss. Second, Larry focused on something that nobody else cared about at the time: mortgage-backed securities for institutional investors. Banks, pension funds, insurance companies, they all needed help managing their fixed income portfolios, but nobody was offering that service. Larry's pitch was simple. We'll manage your money better than you can manage it yourself, because we understand risk better than anyone else on Wall Street. And it worked. Within a year, Blackstone Financial Management had $2.7 billion under management. Within 2 years, they had $17 billion. The growth was so explosive that by 1992, Larry and his partners started thinking bigger. They wanted to break away from Blackstone and build their own independent firm. Larry went to Steve Schwarzman and Pete Peterson with a proposal. Let us buy out Blackstone Financial Management and turn it into its own company. Schwarzman wasn't happy. He had built Blackstone into what it was, and now his bond trading division wanted to leave. But Larry made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Blackstone would keep a 50% stake in the new company and would receive ongoing fees. Plus, Larry agreed to give Schwarzman the naming rights. Schwarzman thought about it. Fine, but I'm keeping part of the name. You can call it BlackRock. And that's how BlackRock got its name. It's literally a combination of Blackstone and Larry's focus on rock-solid risk management. On October 6, 1992, BlackRock officially launched as an independent company with $23 billion in assets under management. Larry Fink was the CEO at age 40. But the real story wasn't the size of the assets. It was what Larry was building behind the scenes. From day one, BlackRock was different from every other investment firm on Wall Street. Traditional asset managers focused on picking winning stocks or bonds. They were all about returns, returns, returns. Larry did the opposite. He focused on risk first, returns second. If you manage risk properly, the returns will take care of themselves. And the key to managing risk was Aladdin. Larry's team had been developing this system since 1988, and by the early 1990s, it was the most powerful risk management platform in the world. Here's how it worked. Aladdin could analyze every single security in a portfolio: stocks, bonds, derivatives, mortgage-backed securities, everything, and simulate how they would perform under thousands of different market scenarios. Rising interest rates, falling oil prices, currency crashes, you name it. Aladdin could predict the impact. No other firm had anything close to this. It was like Larry had built a crystal ball for financial markets. But here's where Larry made his most brilliant move. He didn't just use Aladdin for BlackRock's clients. He started licensing it to other financial institutions. Banks, insurance companies, pension funds, they all wanted access to Aladdin, and Larry charged them hefty fees for it. This created a flywheel effect. The more clients used Aladdin, the more data it collected. The more data it collected, the smarter it became. The smarter it became, the more valuable it was. And the more valuable it was, the more clients wanted to use it. By the late 1990s, Aladdin was managing over $1 trillion in assets across dozens of institutions. And BlackRock was collecting fees on all of it. But Larry wasn't satisfied with just being a risk management software company. He wanted to build the largest asset manager in the world. So he started acquiring competitors. In 1995, BlackRock bought their first company, then another in 1999, then another in 2004. Each acquisition made BlackRock bigger, and each acquisition fed more data into Aladdin, making it even more powerful. By 2006, BlackRock was managing $1.1 trillion in assets. They had gone from $23 billion in 1992 to $1.1 trillion in 14 years. That's a 4,700% increase. But the biggest moment was yet to come. In 2008, the world was hit by the global financial crisis. And just like in 1986, the crisis was triggered by mortgage-backed securities, the exact same financial products that had destroyed Larry's career 22 years earlier. But this time, Larry wasn't the one losing money. He was the one everyone called for help. When Bear Stearns collapsed in March 2008, the Federal Reserve called Larry Fink. When Lehman Brothers went bankrupt in September, the Treasury Department called Larry Fink. When AIG needed a bailout, the government called Larry Fink. Why? Because BlackRock's Aladdin system was the only platform in the world that could actually analyze the toxic mortgage-backed securities that were destroying the global economy. Larry's team worked around the clock, using Aladdin to value billions of dollars in distressed assets. They helped the government figure out which banks were salvageable and which ones were doomed. We became the government's risk manager during the crisis, not because we wanted to, but because nobody else could do it. And when the dust settled, BlackRock emerged as the most trusted name in finance. Institutional investors around the world realized that if the US government trusted BlackRock during the worst financial crisis in 80 years, maybe they should too. Money started flooding into BlackRock. $100 billion, then $200 billion, then $500 billion. But Larry's biggest move was still ahead. In December 2009, BlackRock announced it was acquiring Barclays Global Investors for $13.5 billion. This was a massive deal. Barclays Global Investors managed $2 trillion in assets and was the creator of iShares, the world's largest family of exchange-traded funds, ETFs. With one acquisition, BlackRock doubled in size overnight. They went from $1.3 trillion in assets to over $3 trillion, making them the largest asset manager in the world. But more importantly, BlackRock now controlled the ETF market. iShares was the dominant player in ETFs, and ETFs were about to become the fastest growing investment product in history. Over the next decade, trillions of dollars would flow from actively managed mutual funds into low-cost index ETFs, and BlackRock would capture most of that flow because they owned iShares. Since then, BlackRock has only become more powerful. In 2025, BlackRock manages over $10 trillion in assets. That's more than the GDP of every country on Earth except the United States and China. They own significant stakes in almost every major public company in America. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Tesla. BlackRock is one of the largest shareholders in all of them. In fact, BlackRock owns at least 5% of nearly every S&P 500 company. When Larry Fink sends his annual letter to CEOs, the entire business world stops to read it. In recent years, Larry has used that power to push companies toward environmental and social responsibility. His letters talk about climate change, sustainability, and stakeholder capitalism. Some people love it. Others think he's overstepping. But here's the thing. Larry doesn't care what critics think. He controls $10 trillion. He can influence nearly every major corporation on the planet. He's arguably the most powerful person in global finance. Not bad for a guy who lost $100 million and got fired at age 34. Today, Larry Fink is 72 years old. He's been the CEO of BlackRock for 33 years, longer than almost any other CEO in corporate America. To put that in perspective, when Larry founded BlackRock in 1992, Bill Clinton had just been elected president, the internet was still in its infancy, and the entire asset management industry managed less than $10 trillion globally. Today, BlackRock alone manages that much. Under his leadership, BlackRock has delivered consistent returns year after year, survived multiple financial crises, and grown into something unprecedented in financial history. But it's not just the size that's remarkable, it's the influence. Let me give you some numbers that will blow your mind. BlackRock's $10 trillion in assets under management is larger than the entire GDP of Japan, Germany, and the United Kingdom combined. They manage more money than the top 3 hedge funds in the world put together. They employ over 19,000 people across 70 offices in 30 countries. But here's where it gets really interesting. Through their ownership stakes, BlackRock is the largest shareholder in 90% of S&P 500 companies. Think about that for a second. When you look at companies like Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, ExxonMobil, JP Morgan Chase, BlackRock owns a piece of all of them. And not just a small piece. We're talking about 5 to 8% ownership stakes in nearly every major corporation in America. This means that when Larry Fink writes his annual letter to CEOs, it's not just advice, it's a directive from one of their largest shareholders. In 2020, when Larry sent his letter emphasizing climate risk and sustainable investing, hundreds of companies completely restructured their environmental policies within months. That's power that even most governments don't have. Beyond that, BlackRock's Aladdin system, the same risk management platform Larry built after his failure in 1986, is now used by over 200 financial institutions worldwide. It's monitoring and analyzing over $21 trillion in assets. That's not just BlackRock's money. That's other banks, pension funds, insurance companies, and sovereign wealth funds all relying on Larry's system to manage their risk. In other words, BlackRock doesn't just control $10 trillion directly. They have visibility into and influence over more than $21 trillion in global assets. That's roughly 10% of all financial assets in the world. And Larry has used this power in controversial ways. In recent years, he's become one of the most vocal advocates for ESG investing, environmental, social, and governance factors. His annual letters talk about climate change, diversity, sustainability, and stakeholder capitalism. Some people love this. They see Larry as a visionary who's using corporate power to address global challenges that governments have failed to solve. Others hate it. They see him as an unelected bureaucrat imposing his personal politics on the entire economy. Republican politicians have accused him of pushing a woke agenda. Some states like Florida and Texas have even pulled billions of dollars from BlackRock in protest. But here's the thing. Larry doesn't seem to care what critics think. He controls $10 trillion. He can afford to take the long view. I don't need to worry about quarterly earnings or short-term political cycles. I'm thinking about what the world will look like in 10, 20, 30 years. And I'm positioning BlackRock and our clients for that future. That confidence, that long-term thinking, that willingness to be unpopular, it's vintage Larry Fink. It's the same mindset that led him to choose First Boston's bond department when everyone else wanted equity trading. The same mindset that led him to join Blackstone after being fired. The same mindset that led him to focus on risk management when everyone else was chasing returns. But now, questions are starting to emerge. What happens when Larry Fink retires? Can BlackRock survive without the man who built it? Who could possibly fill his shoes? These aren't just theoretical questions anymore. Larry is 72. He's been running BlackRock since 1992. That's 3 decades of him being the face, the vision, and the driving force behind everything the company does. Unlike other companies where the CEO is just one executive among many, BlackRock is inseparable from Larry Fink. He founded it, he built Aladdin, he made every major acquisition decision. He wrote every annual letter that shaped corporate America. He personally handled the relationships with heads of state, central banks, and sovereign wealth funds. The question isn't whether Larry will eventually retire. The question is whether BlackRock can function without him. And Wall Street is starting to get nervous about it. In 2023, BlackRock's stock dropped 20% during a market downturn, and analysts immediately started questioning the company's post-Fink strategy. Investors are wondering, is BlackRock's dominance tied to Larry's personal relationships and reputation? Or has he built an institution that can outlast him? Larry knows this is a problem. In fact, he's been working on succession planning for years. In 2017, he promoted 6 executives to vice chairman roles, creating a leadership team that could theoretically run the company collectively. Among them are some of BlackRock's most powerful figures. Robert Capito, who co-founded the company with Larry, Mark Weidman, who runs international operations, and Rob Goldstein, who oversees the asset management division. On paper, this sounds great. A diverse leadership team ready to take over. But here's the problem. None of them are Larry Fink. None of them have his personal relationships with world leaders. None of them have his vision for how asset management should evolve. And none of them have his credibility. The credibility that comes from building a company from 23 billion to 10 trillion in size. In fact, when reporters have asked Larry directly about succession, his answers have been vague at best. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. I love what I do. When the time is right, we have excellent people ready to lead. That's not exactly a detailed succession plan, and it's making investors nervous. Some analysts believe that Larry is waiting to hit a specific milestone before stepping down. Maybe $15 trillion in assets under management, or maybe his 75th birthday. Others think he'll never fully retire, that he'll transition to an executive chairman role, where he still controls the major strategic decisions. But there's another possibility that people don't talk about publicly. What if BlackRock gets broken up? Think about it. BlackRock controls such a massive percentage of the US economy that regulators are starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Should one company have that much influence over corporate America? Is it healthy for democracy to have an unelected asset manager essentially dictating corporate policy through shareholder voting? In 2023, several senators introduced legislation that would limit how much voting power asset managers can have in the companies they invest in. If that passes, it could fundamentally reshape BlackRock's business model. And that's not even considering the ESG backlash. Larry's push for sustainable investing has made BlackRock a political target. Conservative states are pulling money out. Republican politicians are talking about investigations. If the political winds shift, BlackRock could face serious regulatory challenges.